Hi, everyone. This is Michael Lappin at Colorado State University. I'm a professor of internal medicine here at Colorado State, and I direct the Center for Companion Animal Studies, which you can visit our website if you would like to see what all we do. But as an internist, I've had a great interest in probiotics over the last 15 years. And specifically for today's lecture, we'll be focusing on a few things that have been done around the world with probiotics and the effect that those probiotics might have on the immune system. Of course, there's been a lot of work on diarrhea and probiotics, but controlling and perhaps lessening inflammation, like with an animal with a chronic infectious disease, that type of work, we've had less studies. And I look forward to, in our 30 minutes today, be able to update you on several of those different studies. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at my email, mlappin@colostate.edu. And unfortunately, like many Americans, I am only speaking one language very well. So if you could write to me in English, no matter what country you might be coming from, then I'll try to respond. And as my friends all around the world realize, if I don't respond in 1 or 2 days, I'm probably not going to respond to that email. So please remember, it is okay to write the email again, and on the subject line, say second attempt. That always catches my eye, and I make sure that I haven't fallen behind on my emails. About 200 of them come every day, which can make it a little bit hard to keep up. But please don't hesitate to follow. I really want to make sure this lecture was clear. I did want to give a disclosure slide as we continue on with this lecture. My Center for Companion Animal Studies has been quite fortunate to have funding opportunities from many of the different pet food companies, drug companies, vaccine companies to support the type of work that we do. I'm really proud to be part of the Purina Institute, both in the Americas and beyond, and do a lot of work with diets and probiotics for that company specifically. However, how we avoid any potential conflict in lectures of this type, even though we might be doing research with those companies, is we make sure to only talk about published work. That way, anything that I say today will have been viewed by other specialists at the level at least as a research abstract, like we would see at the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine or at the ECVIM abstracts. So again, today you can rest assured anything that I'll present out loud will have been published at some level. And even better is if it's been in a peer-reviewed manuscript, which most of the studies that I'll talk about today are actually in peer-reviewed journals, not just abstracts. But thank you for spending part of your time this meeting with me, and I look forward to the next time we're together. Hopefully we'll be in person. So now what I would like to do is start the lecture with just the kind of basic definitions that everyone should have at the top of their head if you're living in a country that uses probiotics. So probiotics themselves, it's a bacterium that exerts a beneficial effect on the host. So they are fed or supplemented externally and then potentially helping our indigenous microbiome or microbiota. Prebiotics are supplements or foods that then help stimulate those endogenous microorganisms that are within the microbiome or microbiota. Things like inulin, things like psyllium are beneficial to those bacteria. And so now, as you've seen around the world, we're now seeing more human and veterinary products that actually have the bacteria that's causing the beneficial effect. We have that bacterium also combined with a prebiotic. And when you combine those two things together, they're called a symbiotic. And of course, to have symbiotic relationships, the combination of two things giving even better response than the two individually, is a great way to potentially enhance either immune system responses or perhaps control things like diarrhea. And so now around the world, we have different products and different companies, but this general standardization of definition is usually what's used. So we probably have seen the most papers for small companion animals, and I mainly study dogs and cats. We've seen most of the information with probiotics or symbiotics, really for the management of gastrointestinal diseases. I think no matter where you are in the world today, if we are looking at this slide, which is a fecal score of 6 to 7, if you use the Purina scale, a 7 is water. Shifting that to a Purina score of 3 is actually everyone's goal, to have a normal stool. And the sooner that we can correct that, the better. Less suffering for the pet, less suffering for the owner who has to clean the materials that are contaminated with the diarrhea. So I think everyone on the call would agree that if we can speed these things, that would be great. So I wanted to share with you 2 great review articles, one from Europe just this year, and another review article from our friends at Iowa and Texas in the United States. These are 2 open access papers that you can download to read all the different papers that have been published so far in small companion animals like the dog and the cat. And I think you're going to be amazed, just like I was, is how few papers there are. Probiotics and symbiotics have been used in human medicine much longer, and so we do have more published papers and even meta-analyses where you can study different manuscripts all combined to look for commonalities. Well, in small companion animals, we barely have publications at all, much less enough publications to lead to meta-analyses. But the good news is we have gathered more and more data, especially in the last 5 and 6 years, learning more about the microbiome and how, and again today in this slide talking about gastrointestinal microbiome, that those can be manipulated with a positive effect. So I think we would all agree there's some data for diarrhea, more data both in people and pets with lessening antibiotic-associated diarrhea. And now, if you think about inflammatory bowel disease and the fact that some probiotics have been shown to be effective to manage that syndrome, that very well could also be related to immune modulating. Yeah, remember IBD or inflammatory bowel disease is an overactive immune system. And so some pretty good data that I'll share a little bit later in the lecture suggesting that we can lessen the number of drugs or the doses of drugs that we might need to control inflammatory bowel disease. And there's also some data now that probiotics could even lessen constipation. So in another lecture sometime, I'll look forward to sharing with you all the work that our group has done to lessen antibiotic diarrhea with probiotics and other studies of that type. And hopefully in future lectures, we'll also share a little bit more information on how we might lessen anxiety by manipulating the microbiome with specific bacteria in the probiotic group. As you might have read, this has been done in dogs already with the product in the United States that might come to other countries in the near future. And we've just finished work in cats showing that we can lessen anxiety with the probiotic. But for today's lecture, we really chose to focus on, can we modulate the immune system? Can those organisms interacting with our complex microbiome, could they do things to help your immunity? And remember, that could go either way. We can actually be trying to lessen the immune response, so decrease immune reactions. The example that I've already given is with inflammatory bowel disease. Well, there's actually work now with probiotics that might actually lessen atopic dermatitis clinical signs, which would be mainly pruritus, so lessening itching. So that pathway, we'll share a number of papers over the course of this lecture today. Then the other main pathway, think of all those chronic infectious diseases. Some parts of your country may have leishmaniasis. We all have demodicosis, causing skin disease. Most veterinarians around the world see chronic resistant urinary tract infections. Wouldn't it be great if we could, with something that you eat, probiotic in this situation, wouldn't it be great if we could help manipulate the immune system in a positive way to help control infectious diseases, perhaps lessen the numbers of specific drugs that we would need for treatments? And so today, I'm looking forward to sharing with you some of the information on both of those pathways, either immune enhancing or perhaps immune dampening. And all of these mechanisms are proposed for how probiotics work. But the good news is now in small companion animal, we do have more tools to assess the immune system. 15 years ago, when I first started with probiotic research, we didn't have nearly the tools that we have to prove how they're working. And that's been one of the call from scientists around the world, is prove how a probiotic is working to make it worthy of using in your clinic. And so I'll share some of those things with you in the coming slides. But before we go on to specific studies looking at either enhancing or perhaps slowing the immune response, before we get to those, I did want to remind you, if you're the consumer, if you're the veterinarian that's going to make a recommendation for using a probiotic to one of your patients, the owner, of course, having to pay for that probiotic, one of the things that I wanted to remind you is that many countries around the world, and I'll use my country as a great example, there is very few regulations to call something containing a probiotic a beneficial bacterium. Yes, and in fact, if you look at this study from our friends Scott Weiss and Associates in Ontario, Canada, a couple of these types of studies have been performed where they purchased products that supposedly contained a probiotic and then cultured to see if they were reaching their claims that were written on the label, numbers of bacteria, types of bacteria, etc. And it is amazing. In studies of this type, there were frequently products that supposedly had probiotics that had no bacteria, certainly not the high numbers of bacteria that we think you need to have a positive effect. And so it's really important that as different probiotics come into your countries, please make sure that those manufacturers can provide to you their quality control data. And what I like to know the most myself is that they have data proving that at the end of the proposed shelf life, at the end of the shelf life, that they have the number of bacteria that they believe to be effective. And then the second thing I really like the companies to be able to produce for me is a study proving their probiotic did something, preferably a clinical research study, proving their probiotic actually helped for one of the problems that I would use it for as a practicing veterinarian. So those are my first two big questions when I see a new probiotic coming is, do you have stability data? Do you have any clinical data supporting the use of this in my patients, my owners' pets? And if they can't provide that information, then I don't buy that probiotic. So some of the other questions that you'll see slowly answered over the years, is it actually better to have more than one bacterium? One of the worldwide probiotics that's been sold the most with good quality control and a lot of different studies is the probiotic called Enterococcus faecium strain SF68. Well, they have many studies showing that it works. Several of them we'll talk about today. And then there are other companies that have chosen to put more than one bacteria, maybe 5, sometimes 6 bacteria, different ones. And then it makes you feel like perhaps that's better, right? Because they have more. More always seems better. But I wanted to remind you, more may not be better. In fact, I've done a study where I added a second probiotic to the first one, which was already known to be good, that strain SF68. We added a second good probiotic. Well, it didn't make it better. They were both good, but having extra organisms doesn't necessarily enhance the responses. And in fact, as we go through this lecture, as I show you some data that probiotics can lessen the immune system and other probiotics can stimulate it. Well, what if you had 5 bacteria in your product? You don't know what they do individually, but what if one of them is an immune stimulant and one is an immune dampening organism? Yeah, they might be counterbalancing. And so even though more always sounds better, the only way you can say it's better is actually to prove it. And that's the type of data we honestly don't have. But the good news is many of these companies are now publishing data. So this particular one, which does have multiple different organisms, that's fine. They don't know how the organisms potentially interact individually, but at least the combination of the organisms, when given to a really important problem, inflammatory bowel disease in dogs, they now have 2 peer-reviewed publications showing that this combo probiotic that has multiple bacteria had a clinical effect. And so that's great. These are 2 papers from the United States that are just great examples of having evidence that a probiotic could help a hyperactive immune system, in this case, inflammatory bowel disease. Because as you read these papers, you will see that the probiotic was beneficial. In some cases, could even be used as a primary treatment. In most of the cases, was decreasing the amount of other drugs needed to control the GI signs. Yeah, lessening the prednisolone dose, lessening metronidazole dose. That's all a good thing as far as I'm concerned as an internist. So congratulations to that company for taking some of their profits and publishing studies proving that their probiotic combination did something in a positive way for a syndrome that we care about. So that SF68 strain of Enterococcus faecium that I've mentioned, again, different countries have different products, but that particular strain of bacteria is owned by Purina. But before it was a product, this basic research was started years ago. And of course, the nice authors of this paper, Jalil, Christoph, a number of those, I was able to meet them before this manuscript that I'll share with you now was actually published. I got to see it before it was a paper. And I wasn't even a probiotic person at the time. I wasn't using probiotics very often in my clinical patients. But they mentioned to me that they had work that suggested when they supplemented puppies with either the probiotic, again, Enterococcus faecium strain SF68, when they supplemented puppies with that probiotic, and then another group of puppies got the placebo, and they followed them over many weeks, there was evidence like increased IgA in feces. It was suggesting that the probiotic was immune modulating and potentially in a positive way. And in fact, when you read this paper later tonight, when they looked at the vaccine responses, and so this chart shows the canine distemper virus, IgG and IgA, look at 10 weeks of supplementation. You start seeing a separation where the supplemented puppies maintained higher distemper antibodies than the control puppies over time. And what that data shows you is this probiotic kept the B cell side of the immune system functioning at a higher level than in the control puppies. Very important for me to point out, you don't have to have a probiotic for vaccines to work. The control puppies were also immune to distemper virus. But what it shows you is that in a laboratory experiment, this probiotic stimulates B cell function, which in certain circumstances could be a very, very good thing. So that was a nice paper. But, you know, at the time, that was again a number of years ago, some of the mechanisms to follow the immune system we didn't have back then. And they didn't really start testing till around 10 weeks of supplementation. And so I came to them after they had published that paper and asked them if my laboratory in Colorado, could I study this strain of probiotic in normal beagles? And by the way, my laboratory adopts all research animals. So these beagles are now in private homes. But what we wanted to do is get more information whether or not this particular probiotic could also stimulate T cells. We had some new techniques since the previous paper. And so what we did in this study is we used the animals' baseline week 0 data, supplemented them, and then followed them over the course of a 12-week period. And so here's one of the punchlines, one of the positive findings. When we stimulated the total lymphocyte population, B cells, T cells, in combination with one of these non-specific stimulants, these puppies' lymphocytes responded much stronger as early as 4 weeks of supplementation. In that same abstract, we also showed what had been seen previously is as early as 4 weeks now, we can prove it's a B cell stimulant. And then we also had additional data saying that it's a T cell stimulant. This is, again, Enterococcus faecium, strain SF68. But that was quite fascinating to be able to show evidence for both B and T cell increased function as soon as 4 weeks. Well, you take that data all together, now you've got a probiotic that could potentially help you with treatment of some of your clinical problems, decreasing some sort of clinical disease. And so now I want to show you with that same probiotic, two different major studies proving that being a T cell and a B cell enhancing probiotic could be beneficial. So combined with the normal Beagle data that I just shared, it's going to be combined with this particular abstract showing an effect of the probiotic on dogs with generalized Demodex. We chose the pit bull terriers so that we could be as close to standardized as possible, and they had to be generalized, not focal. For humane reasons, these types of studies, you have to treat them all. So all the dogs got a great diet, all the dogs were treated for bacterial infections, all the dogs were treated with a Demodex drug. So the only difference between the two groups is they were randomized into getting either the probiotic or the placebo, and the placebo was everything else that's in the probiotic except the bacterium. And so we then blinded the dermatologists. They didn't know which dog was which when they're doing their skin scrapings, looking at their clinical responses. We followed them over time with their immune responses as well. And I'd love to share with you today a couple of our classic findings from this paper. We were able to show that the animals that were supplemented with the probiotic, Enterococcus faecium strain SF68, they had a better or a faster decrease in mite numbers than the placebo dogs. And then when we looked at their clinical scores, the clinical scores improved greater in the dogs fed the probiotic compared to the placebo. Those changes were numerical, and so we need a bigger study to continue to find statistical differences if they exist. But the data is strongly suggestive that this T cell and B cell stimulating probiotic could aid in the management of a chronic infectious disease. And those dogs went on to have great lives. They grew their hair back. They were socialized while we were doing the study. They turned out to all be excellent pets. You'll see more work in the coming years on atopy, as we mentioned. There's a position paper that it should work for atopy, and some probiotics have been studied for people. There was a study using Enterococcus faecium SF68 that didn't appear to provide benefits. And so not all probiotics do all things. And perhaps this one was related to the fact that it's an immune stimulating probiotic, so better with chronic infections rather than with chronic immune turn on. And I can't wait till I see you next in person, because we are working with another probiotic, different strain of organism that does appear to work for atopy. Can't wait next time. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you today in our talk was we did this work about the same time we were doing the dogs. We had shown that, again, the probiotic Enterococcus faecium strain SF68, we had shown previously that it's safe for kittens and that it also raised T helper cell percentages over time. And since herpes is kept in remission by the T helper cells, we wanted to assess, could this probiotic, compared to a placebo group, could we lessen recurrence of herpes under mild stress? And so we had the cats living in rooms together, two different rooms. One group got the probiotic, the other group got the placebo. And then to induce mild stress within their own rooms, they went from gang to cages, to gang to cages. And I tell you, it was very interesting because we showed stress can change your microbiome. And this probiotic could block those stress changes, and the probiotic was able to lessen the signs of recurrent herpes. Much stronger responses than in the placebo group. And so again, more information suggesting that a probiotic could be immune enhancing. In this case, it's that SF68 strain of Enterococcus faecium. So those are the data that I had hoped to share with you guys today, looking at what evidence do we have that probiotics could either enhance or dampen immune responses, and tell you the exciting news that we'll continue to see these types of studies performed over the coming months to years. Make sure that you're strict on which probiotics that you buy currently. Ask for those studies, ask for that data on stability, and follow up with questions if you have them over time. Thank you very much for letting me be part of this seminar.